Hello Internet, welcome back to our Ripple shader. We're going to take a slight detour for this episode and we are going to make a custom node in ShaderGraph. So every single one of these nodes here that I'm kind of selecting over on this right side, those are all ShaderGraph nodes. You can make your own version of these, and specifically what I want to do is I want to capture all of this logic here. That is choosing either one color or the other based on the output of that step function. I want to be able to select that with a single node. I want all of that to go into one node. We could actually do this with the existing nodes, but I don't want to do that. So we're going to use this as an excuse to make our own. I wouldn't recommend doing it the way that I'm doing it because I feel like that's extra work. What you could do instead is create something that is just a conditional, so like a check. I don't remember the actual name for it. There's some way, we've already used them, so I don't know why I'm forgetting them. But there is a way to do a really basic check to see, like, is this equal to 0, for example? And if it is, then plug this into a branch and do all those other fun things. You can already do that. So like the branch function, for example, would allow us to plug in this ripple radius here and not that, but some other value there. So you could plug into the two colors as the true and the false and go from there. That's an option, but we're not going to do it that way. We're going to write our own. So to get started, there is this blog post from Unity by Matt Dean from March that talks a little bit about this. And in order to do that, you need to implement this CodeFunctionNode. So I'm going to throw that over there. Hopefully we don't need to use it, but I have it there if I actually need it. And so the idea here should be that we create these custom nodes. I already have one created. We're just going to work in Visual Studio Code because it just starts up faster. And so instead of deriving from a mono behavior, we want to derive from a code function node. This isn't going to show up because we don't need any of that. Instead, let's use, there's an import here, which requires us to import the Unity engine editor, and does it pop up here? ShaderGraph. And so this is going to have the API stuff that we actually need for ShaderGraph. And doesn't implement the methods. Let's implement the class, see what it does for us. And it's going to get a function to convert. I don't actually know what this does. So the first thing I do when I'm learning something is go to the documentation. Typically, Unity doesn't have the best documentation on their functions. And you can see here, there's nothing here. So in this case, the best option is just to go to their public API and do that. But we have a blog post, and so we can see sort of what they do. So I'm actually just going to copy from the blog to get started, because I've actually never done this. This is my first time ever even looking at what this does. I just kind of was like, oh, we could put that in a custom node. Is that possible? Yes, let's do that. So that's what we're doing here. My understanding, again, is that there is some sort of custom thing going on. They're calling this the custom function. We're going to call this our select color. Let's call it a binary select color. So you have one or the other option, and if it's true, it goes there, and if it's false, it goes there, and then returns that binary select. Sure. Probably not the best idea to use binary in this case because it isn't actually operating on binary numbers, but already defines a member called getFunction. Okay, I think we're fine. I've actually never really used Visual Studio Code with Unity before, so I'm assuming that those two marked errors are fine. We're going to see what Unity thinks in just a second. But that should at least be the implementation of the very most basic, signature, I guess, for that class. So we should actually be able to see it here. And I don't know where it's going to show up. I don't know if it is going to show up. So let's see what we can do here. What did we call it? We called it a binary select. Okay. Well, that didn't work. Maybe custom? Okay. So apparently, just implementing that is not enough. What we're going to need to do is add a name. And so my understanding is we want a public constructor, custom node like so. And let's just say our name equals a binary select. We need a semicolon. Semicolons are good. It really doesn't like a lot of these like generated things. That .ctor I think is a generated function. But anyway, does it work now? What do we call it? We call it a binary select. So now that it's compiled, hopefully that list has updated. It looks like we have an error. So never mind. Object reference not sent to an instance of an object. Did I break the shader graph? All right, cool. Looks like it. Is there a next step? How do I not make this broken? Well, that's no fun. I don't know. That's weird. One sec. I'm gonna see what I missed because this seems like the next step, and I don't see why we're getting all of these errors. Maybe I'm just missing something. And the errors seem to have gone away, so I think we can actually go on. It just looks like it's being weird. It's also kind of annoying that we're not getting any errors, and we have derived from that class, but we're not seeing anything. I would really like to, even if it's like grayed out and you can't actually use it, just being able to see that it actually exists would be really nice, because right now I have no idea if I'm even in the right, like going in the right direction. I don't know what's going on. So we'll keep going on. It looks like the next thing that you need to do, which seems like a weird pattern. They use static functions. So this object then defines a static string, it looks like, of the binary select function, for example. And what this is going to do is return a string. And to the best of my knowledge, I haven't read this blog post or done any of this, but to the best of my knowledge, what they mean when they show, let me do it this way. Zoom in, do that, blah. We are down here. When they show this, to the best of my knowledge, what they mean is they're taking an input A and an input B and setting it to an output out. And in your shader, in your compiled shader, this highlighted bit is actually what's going to come out of that. And so theoretically, we can write whatever we want in this quote, and then it outputs that in shader language, and you're supposed to write the shader language in this thing. Because it's a string, you're going to get zero syntax help. It's not going to help you one bit at all, unless there's something that I'm really not aware of. So we'll have to just kind of go from there. But theoretically, we can do something like this. One thing I should point out, if you're not super familiar with C#, when you do this @ symbol, that's creating a string literal. And so what that's actually meaning is things like new lines, for example, are going to get captured. So we did an @ a quote, and then a bunch of new lines. Typically that's a syntax error, so if I remove that, it gets really angry at me. But as long as we have that @ it's going to actually realize that I mean this is a giant like quote. So if you need to put a paragraph or multiple paragraphs into something, I wouldn't recommend hard coding that, but if you need to for whatever reason, this is an option. If you find yourself doing that though, in non-specific cases, I would take a closer look at what you actually need to do, because you probably don't need to do this, but it's an option. So let me pull this back up. All right. So what we need to do is just add things. Let's copy what they have for now, because I don't actually know what any of this is doing. And this should be a good base point for us to actually modify things and go from there. So that code that you saw, I'm just going to actually take and copy and paste here. And so this will get us input A, B, and out, returns this, and then we should be good. I don't think I've missed anything. One thing I should point out is what I've done here is actually incorrect. Like I said, this is a string literal. And so what's actually going to happen is I'm going to have a new line here with 2 tabs in it that don't need to be there. So I actually want this to end there. That is just the way that works. You can get yourself into all kinds of weird situations. Another thing, if I were to tab indent this and put it like here or here, whatever you think looks good, those tabs will still be there when you come back to this code. So whenever you run this, those tabs would still exist. So unless you want tabs in your thing, don't do that. That's the easiest way to throw that out there, just because that's just what happens with these kind of literal things. So the last thing we need to do, I'm actually reading from the blog now, is we need to create a working node. And so it looks like, wow, their thing is kind of clunky. Let's just copy and paste this because it's easier over here. So this is what they've, oh geez. This is what they've done. We want this top bit. The title, which is just going to be where this thing is located. At least that's my understanding of this. No code actions exist. It just doesn't like it. Duplicate title attribute. Is this like running like a linter or syntax thing behind the scenes, and I need to actually save the file? It doesn't look like it. It just looks like it's broken. So let's just do a binary select here. And to the best of my knowledge, I don't think we're actually gonna, oh, we do. Yeah, okay, so this title attribute takes a list. When you see params in something like this, that's a C# thing that means you can just comma delimit these things, and that will create an array for you that has each of those arguments in it. So this is actually a 2-element array with custom and binary select in order in that array. And so we can actually like do something weird like this. And so theoretically, this will create a menu with custom / binary select / color in it. So there'll be 3 like sub menus organized like that. So we don't need that. We're just going to do a title, put it under our custom nodes, and do binary select. And theoretically, this works. Or not. Again, never actually tried this. This could all blow up. We've gotten a bunch of errors before, so who knows? Looks like we're getting errors again. Mapping method is null on node custom node. That's actually probably a good thing. And maybe I've missed something, but I feel like I actually want that to happen. And sorry, I'm trying to look at the documentation and see what's going on here. I don't want the null pointer exactly, but I do actually like seeing that it tried to load it, because this node custom node lines up with custom node there. And so to the best of my knowledge, that means we at least attempted to create something for it. The bad news is that this entirely broke the create node thing. It doesn't just exclude it. When you have an error like that, it completely breaks the entire shader graph. That's probably not good, because this means if you have any, like, what's it called? If you have any custom nodes that get imported through an asset or something, if they break your shader editor, you have to manually go and find each of those and delete them. And they may not be super obvious. Otherwise, your entire shader graph is going to break, as far as I can tell. That's probably not a very good feature. I'm also stuck, so I'm going to keep talking because as far as I can tell, we've done what we were supposed to do. So just to kind of run through things, here's that. We're going to create a custom thing, do all of this. That all exists. Get function to convert. That's right there. Our get method info, we return that. Okay. Add the namespace system.reflection. Okay, we've done that. Note the string, blah. Oh. 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 I see. So that's how it works. Sorry, I don't. That's really, really, really weird. So the way this API seems to work is I need this. We're doing a bunch of reflection here. Okay. Um, sorry, this seems weird. But the way this is working, this is returning a method info. That's coming from the system.reflection namespace. We've covered reflection in the past, so I'm not going to go super deep into it here. But what a method info is it is C#'s understanding of a method behind the scenes. It's actually like going to understand, here are the functions and the types and the things. So you can see actually the attributes, the calling convention, the declaring type. All of this is part of the method info. You can see, is it a public method? Is it a static method? Is it virtual? All of that is there, and you can access all of that. Reflection allows you to do a lot of really gross things. What this is actually getting us to do is it is getting the type of this custom node, getting the method by name off of that type, and searching for things that are static and non-public, which means it can be pretty much anything, which is why this static string doesn't need to be public. It's also why it can be static. We could make this non-static if we wanted, and just if we're just getting it by reflection, we should be, well, I should take that back. Since this has to be static because they're invoking it by reflection, which means they don't actually need the object to exist. Maybe that's why? So they don't need to instantiate all the nodes when they actually compile the thing? I don't really know. But all this is doing, this overridden function is telling you what function to call with that node. And it happens to be this one. That's how that's all working. And the reason it returns the method info, I'm assuming, is because if you had just overridden this function, if it was just a function override here, the problem you'd run into is you wouldn't be able to change the number of arguments and things like that. And that's how they're injecting in all this other fun stuff. These arguments are actually what appears as the inputs and outputs of your node. And so they can't have that be the output of the this thing, because if they did that, then you'd be fixed and need to have like 2 inputs. And that's not great. So instead they have you give the function name. That's interesting. I'm not going to change this right now, but I have a change that I want to make to this that I think will make it a little bit more clear. It might require an update to our .NET runtime, but it will make it a little bit more clear, and it will help with like refactoring and things. So we'll get back to that. This should work now though, because what I did is I changed this get method. When I was reading this, I was assuming that this get method, because I hadn't really fully understood it, that happens. I hadn't really assumed that this would be the name of the function. I assumed that it would be the name of the node. That's coming from here. This name, not here, up here in the title. That's just what it appears in the menu. The name here, to the best of my knowledge, is what the node is going to be. We can figure out that later. But actually, let's do menu. Let's just put that in the things there, and then if menu shows up anywhere else, then we know that it came from up there in the title and not from anywhere else. So, create node. Let's let this compile first, because otherwise this is not going to work. There we go. Let's clear our console and create node. And now we should have this custom thing and our binary select from our menu, and it's just called the binary select with an A and a B input and 1 output. So that means this whole thing works. It doesn't do what we want it to, but that's fine. So let's take all of this logic and plug it in. So we need one more input. I'm going to leave this here. I may regret this, but we're going to refactor this in place. I'm curious how well this is handled. Also, before I forget, one of the cool new things that's added in C# something or other is you can do this name of, and then any property or class or function or whatever is not available in C#4. So this won't work just by default. We need to actually update C#4. But the advantage of doing name of this, what this is going to do is translate whatever you put in here into a string. So the output is going to be the same as what we had, but now there's some typing going on here. This actually, our behind the scenes now, our IDE, our Visual Studio or Writer, or whatever you're using, is going to know that those two types are the same thing. And so if we do a rename on it, ooh, that's not right. How do you rename in Visual Studio Code? Rename symbol, F2. So if we do binary select code or shader code or whatever we want, it will rename it in both places. Why didn't it rename it in both places? Okay, that was a bad example, but theoretically it should rename it in both places, and then you're set, because you've just done the rename all at once, which means your refactorings and stuff are just safer. It's a quick trick, and it's not any harder, so that's sort of my preference. Since this doesn't work in that version of C#, I'm not going to update it for this project. That seems like overkill, but that's an option if you're using the experimental versions of .NET in Unity. So that was a long ramble about a whole bunch of things that probably don't matter. So let's do color 0 and color 1, or input 0, result 0, that's probably better, and result 1. And the way this is going to do is result 0, result 1. And so what we want to happen here is exactly what we have in our shader graph. I've actually changed this, so those should update as soon as this compiles. These A, B, and out should be updated, and they did update. So that's good. It doesn't crash shader graph if you do that. I'm curious though, what happens if I have, like, we're gonna have 10 as the result 1 value, and I am going to go back in here and add a input value. So I want to do 0, 1, 2, 3. Now the two things changed here. One, I added another input value, and 2, I changed the slot number. I don't actually know exactly what that means, of result 1. So the question is, does result 1 stay as 10, or does it change? And if it changes, does result 0, which now is in the slot that result 1 was in, become 10? because that could actually introduce some weird errors when you start compiling these things. If it doesn't migrate that correctly, which probably it could introduce errors in either direction. So I just kind of want to know what happens. It looks like it binds it to the slot. So result 1 is now 0, and result 0 is now 10. So what we want is we want to output our step value into the input here. So I can actually start doing this and have our outside color be the result when it is, let's say 0, and this when it's that. Cool. So this is kind of a mess because it goes in the same spot as everything else, and then it outputs this. What we're doing is adding 2 colors and outputting them. It really doesn't like that. So what I want to end up doing is grabbing all of this logic and combining it together. And so I think the best way to do that, result 0, result 1. And so result 0, we want that to be the result when the input is 0. So we want input, or 1 minus our input times the result 0. And there's going to be a lot of just quotes and stuff here, but that's just the way that works. And then plus our input times our result 1. And so if input is 1, then result 1 becomes whatever. Result 1 becomes the preferred thing, because 1 times that works, and then 1 minus the input makes that 0 times the result, so that becomes 0. So we should be able to output this and then have it be grabbed and actually use the correct color for everything that we're actually trying to do. At least that's the idea here. And so we get black there. And now theoretically, again, never really tried this, but we're actually going to try to actually add this to the output of our color here. So I should be able to delete most of this. I want to be kind of careful here. And delete that and delete that. We can move this up here, do that and that, and then take our output and plug it into the color. And now theoretically, we should get the same thing. And we do. And I should be able to swap these. And it breaks. Nope, just the preview breaks. But it works because now everything's switched. Which means we actually made something that works pretty quickly, actually. It's only been 20 minutes and I haven't really understood any of the starting ground. This has been me learning this. So I guess that's how you would make a custom node. And it just sort of works. There's a few gotchas there. The naming thing is a little bit weird. Some of these binding flags you may not need. I imagine I just broke it there by deleting that non-public. That should break it because our static function is not public. And so I kind of expect it to turn purple or do something else. Yeah, throws a bunch of errors. Ooh, and deletes the node. That might be good to know. And so we should be able to fix that without adding that new thing by just making this static function public. That should make it come back. We may need to actually recreate the node. Okay, that didn't work either. Huh. Okay, maybe it expects them to be private. Less accessible than... Oh, I would have needed to make the class public. But that's probably a good thing to know. These custom nodes completely break your your code if you plug in the wrong thing. Huh. Okay. So what ended up happening is if we create a syntax error, it just deletes the node, which means your shader breaks and you have to go and remember how it was set up because that node doesn't exist anymore. So if you use a lot of these, it goes slow, I guess, is the best, or version control your shader graph stuff. I don't know what those look like in text, but that seems really dangerous if it's just going to delete things for you, because then you have to get them back. And if you were doing that like a month ago or somebody else in your team did it, that could get difficult, especially if you're like a programmer and an artist kind of collaborating. If the artist is doing the shader graph stuff and the programmer is doing the custom node stuff, that may clash. So just keep that in mind. Other than that, though, I think that's mostly it. There's one thing that's really bugging me, though, and I'm going to try to figure out what's going on there. You'll notice this line from the output of step goes from blue to purple. What that means is that it's going from a one-dimensional vector to a four-dimensional vector. I don't want that. I want this input to be marked as a 1D vector always. Now, I have no idea how to do that, but we're going to try. Dynamic dimension vector. Let's see what this is. Let's just try vector 1. Is that really how easy this is? If I just do a vector 1 here, is it going to just automatically update that to be the input of a vector 1? I'm assuming it will be. Yeah, cool. So that's done. And then we have the output there. And whatever that our output is just the dynamic dimension vector. So that's going to be a vector that can kind of grow or shrink based on the inputs. So I think we're good. I think we've got everything. If the cool thing with the way this is implemented is I don't need to actually plug in colors here. I should be able to create a binary select thing. And you can see that already this is using 1D vectors here. So only if I plug in like a 3-dimensional vector from way over here will it say, hey, you need a 3D vector for this result as well. So that's pretty neat. I like that. Anyway, I'll leave it here because that's long enough. But that's how you do custom nodes. There will be a link to the Unity blog post on all of this, as well as the documentation. So you can go and check that out. I'll also try to throw up a link to the source for my custom node in case you want to use that. Again, you don't actually need the custom node that I have. There's conditionals or whatever that you can use to accomplish the same thing. So it's not actually needed. It's just a good example or excuse to kind of play with these. So that's what we're doing here. But anyway, that's that, and I will leave it there. Hopefully we'll get to some other things. I have a few fun projects coming up, so stay tuned, and I will see you guys in the next video. So until then, see you, Internet.